That was a nice move by Pipkins, taking it right to the rack himself. Wide open three, left wing, and it's good. Nylon, the dunk likes that, Matt.
A three from the right side, and it's good! The one, Pipkins, the man, yet again.
Hello and welcome to The Flex. I'm Matt St. Jean, and we have a special episode for you today. Friars with an 8-day break. So we're taking this opportunity to take a look at the state of the Friars, where things stand at this point in the regular season. And we had to bring in the heavy hitters for this one. We have some special guests with us to talk things through. First, coming back to the show, the voice of the Big East, now the voice of the NBA G League as well, taking time out of his busy schedule. It's John Fanta. Welcome back.
Guys, thanks very much for having me. It's great to be joining the Flex. You guys do a tremendous job, and I'm excited for this.
Thank you. We appreciate it. With us as well, Kevin Farrahar from FriarBasketball.com. You've been writing about the Friars since 2009. You know this team inside and out better than most, so thank you for coming on.
Looking forward to it, guys. Thank you.
And as always, it's my co-host, Joe Howie. You know him. You love him. Welcome back, I guess. I mean, you're here every time.
Welcome back. The last time I was here was the last podcast. But John and Kevin, thanks for coming on. You know, you guys do a great job covering the Friars in the Big East. So having both of you on here at the same time is huge. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we got a lot to talk about. Kevin, you're new to the show, so I'm gonna direct this first question right at you. The Friars were picked third in the Big East by the coaches in the preseason poll. There were high hopes for this team, now sitting at 7th in the conference. And no matter what happens over the next 2 weeks, this regular season has certainly been a disappointment. What do you think has been the biggest reason for that so far?
It's been the defense. If you look at their numbers, like compare their KenPom year to year, both offensively and defensively, the offense is actually, if you're going strictly by KenPom, is probably the best it's been, I don't know, in like 5 or 6 years. But the defense, they're typically a top 40 defense. And I think this year they're currently like 81st. So that's a huge drop for them. And if you look at all the numbers there, like they're just not turning teams over as much. They're not protecting the rim as well. So I think that's the big thing. And, you know, we talk every year about, and there was a lot made of losing the senior class, the 6 seniors from last year. But to me, the drum I've been beating all year is you lose Alpha, Khalif, and Malik White. Those are 3 really good defenders at 3 different positions. And that was just a lot for them to make up, especially without an offseason. You know, PC came back kind of late. I think they came back probably close to September. So they really didn't have, you know, that time to really prepare they normally do. And then you factor in, you know, you lose your point guard there too. And it's just been a lot of things that kind of gone against him this year. But I think the defense is the big one to me.
Yeah, I think people anticipated a little bit of a defensive drop-off when you look at who they lost. I don't think anybody expected it to be as big as what it's been, especially, I mean, the coaches picked this team third in the Big East for a reason. Nobody's going to pick a team third in the Big East if they think the defense is going to be this weak. John, do you think the perception around the league was wrong, or what is it that's contributing to this?
Yeah, I think that the perception around the league was that David Duke and A.J. Reeves, that this would be their time, that the A.J. Reeves that we saw down the stretch of the end of last year, when we would see him have spurts in games and it created a hot streak, that would be able to come to fruition with more usage. You know, one of the interesting metrics of last year's team was, I believe, that A.J. Reeves, in terms of percentage of total shots, you know, attempts, takes, it was about 5th on the team, in the 5th or 6th range. And so the thought in mind was that could become 2 or 3, that maybe he wouldn't be thinking about competing with other players on his own team. Sometimes you just play loosely. The fact is that hasn't translated, and A.J. Reeves has been underwhelming, unfortunately, for the Friars. And I think the other thing is you know, we all heard that Jared Bynum was going to be able to take over the point guard spot, and we heard really good things. I mean, you know, a Providence staff member had talked to me over the summer and said that he has Kyron Cartwright-like quickness. And I remember thinking, you know, this could really work with Duke and Reeves, and other coaches in the league thought the same. And then what we thought has actually happened is Nate Watson has been a beast. He's probably been better than we even thought he would be. But to Kevin's point, the offensive metrics, I think, are boosted because of how dominant Watson has been in some games. All this being said, though, they don't have depth. And when you don't have depth, it makes you much easier to defend. And when you take bad shots, that's the first step to potentially allowing teams to go on runs. It's just as much as a turnover. And this Friars defense has not been what we've seen in the past. And I totally agree with Kevin on the fact that it is very surprising, eye-opening, to see a Providence team under Ed Cooley struggle the way this team has struggled on the defensive end of the floor at times. But I do think it's a two-way street. I think when you don't have depth, or maybe you think you have it and then it doesn't happen, there's just not – when you walk into a game, you say, okay, well, Duke and Watson are going to have to play their best for this team to have a chance to win. If one of them has an off day, it's probably not going to work out. Even when A.J. Reeves had his best day at Georgetown, they lost. And they lost because David Duke couldn't have been colder. I think that the Friars have actually gotten a little bit unfortunate, but that's what's going to happen when they had a target on their backs. They've had games that you say they're there. The game at Xavier, they should have won. I mean, the fact that they lost that game was just mind-boggling. So this has been a really frustrating year, and I think it comes down to, yes, the defense, but the other thing is coaches thought this team would have enough options. They only have really two, and if one of those guys isn't going, it's tough sledding because the fact is you can't really rely on this Providence bench to do a whole lot.
Yeah, I'm going to bounce off of that, John, especially when you talk about depth. And Kevin, you talked about the loss of Alpha Diallo. I think coming into the season, the proclaimed answer for the loss of Alpha Diallo was supposed to be Noah Horkler and Greg Gant splitting time at the 4. I think it's safe to say at this point the 4 spot has been a huge disappointment for us. I think that is one of our deepest spots on the team. You have Horkler, Gant, Jimmy Nichols, and even Chris Monroe, who can slide up and play big at the 4. And defensively, we get torched on the dribble drive. Guys have trouble closing out when they swallow into the paint, leave wide open shooters in the corners, and that's really been something that we took for granted with Alpha Diallo. I think we let his offensive struggles dictate our perception of him because, yes, he did take some very ill-timed and ill-advised shots last season, but defensively he was locked down, and him and Khalif holding their man down in the paint is something we miss dearly because as good as Watson is on offense, defensively he struggled with pressure at the rim.
Yeah, I mean the numbers for this team when it comes to paint defense are not good. Kevin, I know you touched on this in an article you wrote talking about defending pick and roll and the dribble drive and just how weak that they've been in the paint. And that's probably the single least characteristic aspect of this defense compared to previous Ed Cooley teams.
Yeah, even their defense out of timeouts. One thing I didn't include in that article, which I kind of saw later, is they're near like the very bottom, like bottom 5 or 10 in the country as far as points against out of timeouts. And it's all, to me, it all kind of ties back to communication, which is a really surprising. We've seen in past years where Cooley's teams might start slow and kind of got it together, but it just seems like they're still having those communication issues, and that's the big thing across the board defensively. With you look at like a pick and roll defense or defense out of timeouts, it seems like there's just something missing there as far as Cooley's message kind of getting through to their team on defense.
Yeah, and it's not. This is something we've talked about a lot on the podcast. You never know which Friars team is going to show up because it's there some of the time. They held Seton Hall to 60 points. The defense looked good against DePaul. Then you go to UConn, a much deeper and bigger team, and you look like you're a mid-major playing against a top conference with what look like a talent difference between the two teams. So there's that stark contrast there. And the last time we saw a Friars team this inconsistent from game to game, I think you got to look 2 seasons ago, that 2018-2019 team. Again, right after they lost a bunch of leaders.
Yeah, the UConn game to me, I don't know if you guys want to go too far down this path, but that was particularly kind of jarring to me. And it felt like watching a Big East game before the realignment. Like there were some games in the old Big East where, and they weren't recruiting at the same level they are under Cooley now. So let me make that clear right away. But they just looked like athletically overwhelmed. And I know,
Yep.
Book Night makes a lot of people look like that, but kind of across the board, like with Martin and, Whaley, they just seemed like they were just on a different level athletically in that game. And that to me was really eye opening. It was kind of like, because it feels like it's more to come with UConn as far as, the recruiting is going to take off. And it's going to be interesting to see what they do as far as, trying to keep pace with them, because that was, to me, just really, really eye opening.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and if you look at the recruiting rankings, like AJ Reeves, David Duke, both top 50 recruits, and then you got Greg Gant in there, who was in the 24/7 composite. He's right next to Book Night in the rankings. So this is not a team that should be expected to look that unathletic against UConn.
Yeah. The one thing I've seen a lot about Book Knight's recruiting rankings recently, but he was hurt a lot too. That's one thing people don't know as much. He didn't play a lot of AAU, and he kind of like crept up. So some of his ranking had to do with injuries a little bit too.
Let's call a spade here as well. Okay, a lot of really good programs have players who are totally under recruited and who James Bouknight, he had a meniscus injury, to Kevin's point, and he told me this past week in an interview that he goes, you would not believe the schools that I just lost contact with, and because they forgot my number, quote unquote, forgot my number. We just stopped talking because of a meniscus injury. So again, we look into recruiting so much, and it's important. You got to be able to get kids, but you have got to be able to develop them. And the fact of the matter is this: whatever AJ Reeves was as a freshman before that foot injury, we saw a stretch of basketball there. He was looking like the best freshman in the conference. And ever since that happened, it's like a flash here, a flash there. And I hate to single out one guy, and I'm not trying to do that, but you got to be able to develop talent. And the fact is, the talent really, the supporting cast just hasn't come into form for this ball club. It just hasn't happened. So, I think that, look, is UConn going to beat Providence and Seton Hall for certain recruits? Yeah. UConn already swept in underneath Seton Hall and beat them for Adama Sanogo. And Adama Sanogo is a big-time big man. But you got to be able to round out talent. Talent development, for me, is more important than what star is next to your name or how many stars are next to your name. You got to get the right kids. You got to get the right kids who fit your system. St. John's with Pasha Alexander is showing it right now. This was a guy that dropped down because he had an injury in high school, was a 4-star, dropped to a 3-star, gets totally counted out. And now, he turns out to be this outstanding freshman who's going to be the Big East freshman of the year. So I'm going to tell you right now, for my money, it's always going to be about who develops and who grows. And for this Friars squad, I think it's the type of thing where we thought that we would just see that happen. You can't assume that. You could assume that a program's going to be able to recruit, but we have not seen certain guys take the next step that need to. They don't have a point guard. They haven't had point guard play this season. It's very, very hard to win in this sport when you don't have point guard play.
Yeah, John, just to your point about developing talent, this is something Matt and I talked about off the mic. Was it yesterday, Matt?
Yeah.
2 days ago.
Yeah.
We were talking about how Ed Cooley takes the 3-star guys and turns them into studs. I think Kyron Cartwright is the prime example of this in recent memory. I think Alan Breed is a great example of the process of it right now, because he's a freshman and he's playing like a sophomore. He's taking on big boy minutes, and he's not the point guard that you were expecting with Bynum, where he's more of a table setter. He reminds me more of a Malik White Pipkins combo, where he could play off the ball, he could play on the ball, and he's a better scorer. But developing talent, I think the two guys, and you hit on one of them, AJ Reeves. Greg Gant is another one. We haven't really seen that jump from freshman to sophomore year, given I don't think it was supposed to be a big jump, but he was the starter that was slated to fill the role of Alpha Diallo. I think there was a two paths you could have taken with Horkler and Gant, and at the beginning of the season we went with Gant, and defensively he just hasn't turned on what we thought he was going to. He's long, he's athletic, he's great on the ball, but in terms of defensive schematics, I think he's at a loss. He sees the game very quickly, and he has trouble staying with his man sometimes. So in terms of developing talent, again, this was a shorter off season. You didn't get the summer. They started 2 months, so there is a window of flexibility here. But in terms of overall growth from last season to this season, it's been very minimal. I think the only exception is Nate Watson because he took that knee injury and he really, really developed from it. So he's the only guy that I think has really grown. Duke, we expected, but when you have him on the ball, he's just a different player. And we saw this his freshman year. He's not a good point guard. He's capable of running the point. He leads the Big East in overall assists by volume. He's third in the Big East in assists per game. But with that said, he's second in the Big East in overall volume with turnovers just behind Mamu. So he's a 50-50 point guard. He's much better off the ball.
I want to jump in on something here too, talking about development of talent. I don't think this is a recent thing that we've seen in Friartown either. If you go back, Jalen Lindsey was pretty highly recruited. He never really became the guy that he was expected to. Rodney Bullock took a long time to develop. Chris Dunn at times took a little bit of time to develop, although there were injury concerns there. And I think we've been kind of wrestling with the question, is this development or is there something going on with the identification of talent? Are the Friars picking up guys that are highly talented and highly recruited, but are they kind of getting the other guys who the top teams don't want to get because they see red flags that the Friars aren't?
Yeah, I mean, on the flip side, though, guys, if you look at it, there was a stretch, probably like a 5-year stretch, where Providence had the most improved player in the league 3 of those years. It was Kadeem Batts, it was Ben, it was Kyron Cartwright. So there aren't many coaches in the league who can boast to recruits like, hey, I've developed 3 guys into the most improved player in the league, right? So there's that. There's also, I mean, it's really hard in recruiting. Like there are misses out there, and it's not like it's an NBA draft where your turn is next. You identify the guy you want and you take him. You know, like you've got to find the right kids who also want to come to your school, right? So I think I don't know. I think there's a lot of stuff kind of being thrown out there now as far as what ails the program. But to me, and John, I'd be interested in your thoughts too, but if you look at development, I think it's a lot of it, and maybe this sounds like excuse making for the staff, but I think a lot of it's on the individual players, right? Like, I don't know. I think if you look at the track record there, like PC has had 3 guys win the most improved player under Cooley. So it's not like they've proven they can't do it.
Yeah.
And there's been plenty of guys who've gotten better, you know. So I think that's kind of a tough knock for the staff, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't think it's on the coaching staff. I don't. I mean, I just think you got to either get better or you just don't pan out. I sometimes we love narratives in this sport. These are 18 to 22-year-old kids, you know, and especially during a pandemic, you know, different things have happened circumstantially that have led guys to either surging along or not doing much. And, you know, Providence College itself, their kids didn't get back on campus, I think, until, what was it, like late September, even first week of October? Might have even been after that. I don't even remember. It was late.
They got back in August.
Yeah, but they were
late August
for a period of time.
They were. Yeah, the campus has had some issues.
I mean, I'm talking like 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah.
You know, that's hard. That's really hard. I mean, I was talking to the Providence staff, like it was the end of September, and I'm on the phone with one of their staff members, and he says, yeah, we're not practicing. We're not doing anything right now. Well, you know, that's not gonna help. Not when you lose 6 seniors. You know, not when you lose the amount that you have. I know that Friar fans don't want to hear it. They want to be really good, and they're putting it on Cooley. You know, here's the thing. To Kevin's point, I really do think it's unfair to just totally. It's a multiple. There's not one single person to blame.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't think the staff tries to work on some of these things with these guys? I mean, they know what areas there are to address. Either you get better at it or you don't. Either you become a better defender or you just don't become a better defender. I mean, you know, you get paid to win or lose games. You're going to try to set your kids up for success. I think the setup's been there before. Like, I really do. I think that the setup has been there for Providence to win some games, and they simply have not won games for whatever reason. And the biggest reason probably is we just really haven't seen certain guys come into form. This team doesn't have enough options. You know, when you're scouting for Providence, you know what they're going to do. You know that David Duke and Nate Watson are at the top. If you allow them to beat you, then all you can do is kick yourself because you didn't prepare correctly. You know, Nate Watson torched Creighton. You know, torched them. Absolutely torched them. And what happened in that game? Alan Breed stepped up, made huge plays, but you can't expect a freshman to do that every time out. That's an unfair expectation. Bynum's hurt for a prolonged period of time. Breed's a freshman. Certain things just haven't lined up, and I think the big picture is, look, you got to be able to have your recruiting identity be maintained here, and it's hard when you welcome a school like UConn back into the league. But at the end of the day, again, what you have to do when you're Providence College or when you're a St. John's or when you're a Seton Hall, when you're another Northeast program, that maybe hasn't won at the highest level, you got to be able to get the kid who's a 2 or 3 star that you're taking a bet on and saying, I think he can pan out to be that 4 or 5 star type of guy. So it's a loaded type of situation. There's not blame on any one person, but Kevin's exactly right. Like, I don't think everybody, always wants to navigate towards the staff. Don't get me wrong. There's always a degree of blame on everybody. But if you're gonna blame the coaching staff for lack of development in certain areas, in which I know that they're trying to work with these kids on certain things and they don't get better at them, well, then maybe you missed, or maybe there's something in the past that didn't go your way. So look, here's the other thing. When you've become so accustomed to winning games and then you start to lose them, it's a harsh reality. It's shocking. It's like, what went wrong? How did that happen? They've had an off year. Providence has had an off year. Last year, they were trending towards having an off year, and then we saw what happened when everything clicked. That was the coaching staff's vision, was that team at the end of last year. You got to try to get it out of them earlier. It took some time. I don't think that Providence basketball is in a dark place, big picture. I don't think they're in a spot where you start to get overly worried or anything. I just think that they have had a down year, and they're going to have to be able to hustle that much more to recruit. I think Ed Cooley and his staff can get kids. The transfer market's going to be the wild, wild west, already is. I think that this program's still okay, but I wouldn't just single out the staff for some of the reasons why things have gone the way that they have.
Now let's talk some solutions right now, because this season isn't over and the Friars are not on the bubble right now, but they have some big games left. Obviously, there's still the Big East tournament, and obviously there's talent on this team. And they showed it stretches this season that they can put it all together. So, John, I'll come right back to you with this one. There's 3 games left in the regular season, including a finale against Villanova. Do you think the Friars can win these next 3 games? Xavier, St. John's, Villanova. Where would that put them, and what are they going to have to do? What adjustments do they have to make to get to the point where they're competitive in these games?
I think they're going to beat Xavier Wednesday. I really do. Because they're going to have over a week to prepare. Xavier's got to play tonight as we do this on a Sunday night against Butler. Yeah. All the pressure's on Xavier. Providence has had over a week to prepare. But you asked me for solutions. So here are the solutions. Number one, you got to defensively scout and execute better than you have. You got to be able to focus in on a scout. And you got to be able to say, we're not going to let Nate Johnson have open threes. We're not going to let Zach Fremantle get free. I actually think Providence matches up pretty well with Xavier. Xavier's defense has actually been less efficient and actually worse this year than their offense has been on the whole. Their offense has been improved this season. So I really like the way that Providence matches up with Xavier. And I think that's part of it. In terms of the solutions for how this team can, make a run in the Big East tournament, they probably need some unforeseen things to happen. They need their guard play to improve. They need Greg Gann or Noah Horkler to give them something. You guys said it yourself. Like right now, at times at the power forward spot, it is 5-on-4 for Providence. They're not getting anything from that position. So if I'm a defense and I could say, you leave him out there, if he hits a shot, we're going to live with that all day. That really creates a dilemma for you. So especially if Duke or Reeves isn't shooting the ball well. I mean, it's really tough.
Yeah,
so
we were watching we were rewatching some film from the Marquette game, and there's one screenshot that we found where you can see Duke drives into the paint, and there are 4 Marquette defenders surrounding him. Nobody is respecting the perimeter shot. It's Allen Breed and Jimmy Nichols wide open beyond the arc, and just it doesn't matter because they could just collapse on Duke.
Yeah, make or miss game. You got to be able to knock down some of those shots. I actually think those shots become open against Xavier. And if you guys remember, against Xavier in that first half, they shot the ball really well.
Mm-hmm.
They were shooting the ball well from distance. So I think they're going to be able to get open looks. The complementary cast has to be better, and you got to follow a defensive scout. And Ed Cooley's actually said this after a number of games, how frustrated and how upset he's been at how his team hasn't applied what they're preparing for in the game. And so, look, you've had over a week to prepare for a Xavier team that has a lot of pressure on themselves, a Xavier team that hasn't been good on defense that should give you some open looks. This might be a get-right spot for the Friars. They got to get supporting cast members to. That's the biggest thing for me is you can't have empty possessions. And what that means to me is you've got players on your roster who opposing defenses aren't scared of at all. They're going to let them shoot. So you've got to find other guys to be able to deliver, and you got to follow a defensive scout.
Yeah, I think when I look back at the first matchup between Providence and Xavier, I think with the exception of, I'll say, the final minute 30 when we let Xavier go on, I think it was an 11-0 run to close out the game. I think we played that game pretty well. Duke had a 30-piece. Watson showed up. And I think Reeves and Horkler actually had some big-time shots late in the game. I think there was a sequence where Reeves and Horkler hit back-to-back threes.
They did.
Think I was actually in the car in Vermont with spotty service. I was watching on my phone. I said, that's game. Because we were up, 7? We were up 7 at that point.
We're up by 8 with 1:02 to go, I believe.
Yeah.
And then the wheels fell off. And I think that's when Cooley was saying
they messed up a call.
Yeah.
Was that
on
the
Allen Breed play?
Yep. That was the big momentum shifter there. But I think really the obvious issue with that last matchup was closing out the game defensively. I think if you can bring the offensive punch that you brought the last time and really nail it down on defense, this should be an easy win for the Friars. And again, Xavier has been off for so much time. It's funny. The narrative with Xavier is they wanted to get their 13 games in so they would be eligible for the tournament. It seems like they hit that mark and then just continuously kept getting hit with COVID. So they did it, but they need to make up for it now. What are they, 4-4 in conference? They have a ton of games, and they're probably not all even going to get played.
Yeah.
No.
Kevin, do you think this team has it in them to make a run at the end of the year? From what you've seen, do you think some of these problems are fixable over the next 2 weeks or no?
I mean, I don't at this point. I think they're 4-8 in their last 12 games. Like, that's a big sample size with a short amount of time to play. I'm just not there yet. And I think, to be honest, at this point, you're really just game to game looking to build toward just get momentum. Like, that's the big thing for me now is a lot of times teams can ride good momentum into the following season, especially if they bring back a lot of the guys. So I think that should be a big thing for Providence. I'm putting those thoughts aside. And for me, it's like, let's just see how they improve game to game. Because as we saw last year, teams can make huge strides in a short amount of time. But to me, I just feel like the defense has always been the constant for Providence. So it's like if they could figure out any sort of offense, they're going to be really competitive. And this year, it's kind of the opposite, where it's like, God, they got to figure out the defense. And for me, I thought they would all season. That's why I wasn't panicking all year. I just figured they always figure out defense. They'll do it. They just haven't this year. And I just feel like with 3 games left in the regular season, that's just, to me, that's not enough time to figure it out. But we'll see.
Yeah, it's very late for that patented Ed Cooley run. Typically, it starts with about 6 games left. But you go back to 2018, that team beat Villanova, but also lost at home to DePaul and didn't really put things together until they got to the Big East tournament when they beat Creighton, beat Xavier, almost beat Villanova in the championship. So,
yeah,
I mean,
I would just submit this. If Providence is the 7th seed in the Big East tournament, we'll see who they meet. It might be like Marquette right now, I think. I would take them in that game. And then, the interesting thing is they would draw Creighton, who we've seen they match up pretty well with. It's kind of ironic. So, like, I totally agree with you, Kevin. You're 4-8 in your last 12. that's a large enough sample size to understand that. Is this getting back on track? They are what they are, and you can't. Here's the most frustrating thing with the Providence Friars this year. You cannot take any one single game and try to make it into an assumption of how they are for the good. For the good, I'm saying. You know, the things that they've been weak at for much of the season. Some of the games in which we've seen things happen for the good, you say, oh, if this happens here and if this happens here, they're all big ifs. Those things haven't translated from game to game for the most part. So, like, you know, that's where – but I will say the Big East is such a matchups league, like a lot of conferences, but when you play each other twice and then you go to a third time, and there has been something to be said about Ed kind of packaging something together. I think it's his team. His team gets on a high. They get an adrenaline rush. Would it shock me if I saw Providence beat Marquette and then beat Creighton in the Big East tournament? No, because they were picked to finish third in their league. Like, they have it in them to win those games. It wouldn't shock me, but it would shock the nation, and they'd be in semifinal Friday and you'd be saying, you know, we'd have us We Together family Friars all over New York City, whatever. So it's like you just never know. You know, you don't know about this program sometimes. There are things that happen, but are things going to get corrected? At this point, it is February 21st. If you're looking to correct a major problem, I'm sorry, it's too late.
Yeah, it would be. It's very late to do that, which is something we've been saying. Kevin, you said something in there where I'll just segue into the future a little bit here. You mentioned building momentum for next year, kind of regardless of the outcome of this season. And you said about guys coming back. I think that's the big question in Friartown right now. You've got the two seniors in Noah Horkler and Nate Watson, who could be eligible to come back if they would like to. And there's David Duke, who there was talk about him going to the draft. I don't think that's likely at this point based on what we've seen. Do you guys have any inside info on if any of these guys are going to be back next season or if they're likely to come back?
John, do you want to start?
Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, so for Duke, I have no idea. I imagine a lot going to be how he does in the workouts in the spring. I was on with Kevin McNamara on his show, last week, and he had said that, you know, there was a feeling that there's a chance that Watson and Horkler could come back. I'd be surprised if Nate came back, and that's not based on anything I've heard. That's just based on he's going to be a pretty productive 4-year player. He can go make money somewhere. So who knows? But that was one thing Kevin had said, which kind of surprised me. I thought Horkler, maybe. I was kind of ruling Nate out completely. But that's one thing Kevin mentioned, which I thought was kind of interesting, or very interesting.
The question again?
We're talking about that 5 spot, Nate Watson, Noah Horkler, and also David Duke, if they're going to be back next season, especially for Nate and Noah, if they're going to take advantage of that extra year of eligibility.
I think David Duke's gone. I think he's going to the NBA. That's just my opinion. I think he ends up going forward with the draft. I don't see kids. You know, here's the biggest misnomer with the rule. Mm-hmm. So if you're coming back, that means that your coach is giving up an available scholarship to someone that he either might have promised. Now, Providence doesn't necessarily have that issue, but if you're coming back, that means that, you know, you're on scholarship and you're going to play. That's why some of these programs don't even really have that option at time, nor alone do the coaches necessarily even want to have it. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of it's like when people are like, oh, do you think this kid's going to come back? There's a couple of avenues here, you know, like that entails. Number one, it needs
both sides wanting it.
Yeah, without telling the player, the coach may or may not want it. Mm-hmm. I don't think so. Why? If I'm Nate Watson, why wouldn't I try to start making some money? Mm-hmm. I mean, he should. Nate Watson's had a lot of injuries, right? He should try to start making some money.
Yeah.
That's just my take. Kevin, what do you think about that? I mean, that's just
like I said, all year until Kevin mentioned it, McNamara is a possibility. I was under the assumption that he was gone all year. Like, I never thought he was coming back. In Horkler, I just don't know. You know, is he a 5th-year guy now? Or is he in his I forget.
He's a 5th year.
in there. But maybe it might make sense for him. He's kind of found his footing a little bit the last couple games, so maybe if he ends strong, he considers coming back. But it's so hard to tell. And like John said, these players can come back here, they can transfer somewhere else. Like there's so much to factor in that it's hard to say. I guess we'll just have to see.
Well, I think that assuming that these guys go, that's going to open a lot of question marks for the team next season. The big thing is going to be who plays center. Nate Watson might be the best true center in the Big East right now. And I mean, that opens a massive hole. I don't think Ed Croswell is ready for that. Greg Gant certainly doesn't have that size. And you got Rafael Castro, 6'9", coming in, but you're not going to expect a true freshman to fill the hole that's left by Nate Watson. So I'm assuming you're going to see the Friars look at the transfer portal to fill that spot, kind of like they did with Lawan Pipkins at the 1 coming into last season.
Yeah, and they've had a pretty good luck with that the last couple of years. They really hadn't gone the fifth-year route, I think, until Pipkins was there. But, and I know people feel like Biden's been underwhelming this year, but as far as big men, if you can get like an equivalent who can just come in and play, who you feel will, start. I mean, they're going to have to be honest. I can't imagine it's going to be Croswell next year. But, I think, like John said earlier, this year is going to be insane with the transfers. And I'm sure, there's probably already some in the next couple of weeks, some, conversation going on. Like, I feel like these coaches always know who's coming and going a couple of weeks in advance. And we've seen from Providence, like, Croswell and Bynum, pretty shortly after they announced they were transferring, they were here or committed here. But it's got to be the transfer. I think Castro is probably barely 200 pounds and he's a freshman. That'd be a tough spot to put him in. And it's not like Providence even has like big forwards that you can kind of have as like hybrid 4-5. Like there's no one that really fits in there. So they got to bring in someone transfer wise.
Yeah, and you have to think about this. The season got cut short last year, which led to kids transferring and the pandemic and all that stuff. But what it did do was it bought coaches. It bought certain coaches another year. That we might have seen job changes, but during the pandemic, it wasn't the first thing on some of these ADs' minds, and they just kind of trickled it in if they didn't have to worry about all that crap. So we saw some coaching searches, but the point is, like, this is not Providence. I'm saying big picture. In college basketball, we could see this immediately eligible, the blanket waiver rule. We're going to see more coaching changes because I think you're going to see time start to get back to normal, and you're going to see ADs want to move and try to start anew, turn the page. We might see multiple coaches changed in the Big East Conference this offseason, which could be an interesting offseason. So I think, when you're looking at the state of the sport, it is going to be insane, I think, this offseason of tracking kids, where they're heading, what they're doing. And I know there's narratives out there. If you get the right transfers, things can happen. And Providence is going to have a good core back, but they're going to have to get it off that. They're going to need to bring in some experience, hopefully some NCAA tournament experience, and try to just retrack and kind of recircle back heading into next year.
I think with respect to the transfer narrative we're talking about, I think going forward, times changing back to normal helps that a ton. I think you look at the preparation for this season with the transfers of Bynum and Horkler. They were red shirts last season, so they had that time. But you look at Croswell. He transferred last season. He didn't have that red shirt season with us, and he's hit a bump. I mean, obviously he's playing up a weight class, but I think the time off between this season and next season and the ability to meet during the summer and develop will be advantageous for transfers coming in. I think that's going to help us a ton.
Yeah, I think you've seen around the Big East, there's a handful of guys that transferred in that have not been as good as expected for this season. I think the notable one, Jared Bynum's one, but Bryce Aiken over at Seton Hall. A couple of these guys, you don't get that full offseason to prepare. That's going to hurt guys, and you're right. Having a full offseason to be implemented into a team next year means you might be able to get some more impact transfers. So we'll see who comes into the Friars. They do have also Legend Jeter, who's the 3-star recruit out of Michigan. He's a guy the staff likes a lot. So, Kevin, I'll start with you. What's your outlook on the team for next season, looking at who can be on the roster? Is this a team that can compete at the top of the Big East, or are they retooling some things?
Yeah, I mean, if Duke and Watson are gone, they're retooling, and that's just what it is. That's not a surprise to anyone. I mean, they're sub 500 right now with those two guys, so there's no one they're going to bring in transfer wise or coaching change or anything like that. That's going to change that in my mind. So to me, if those two guys go, it's a rebuilding year.
What about you, John? What do you think?
It is. It's a year in which I think they're, in the middle potentially of a logjam in the conference. Probably in the 6 or 7 range, probably in this league next year. It's going to be a tough year, a tougher year, at least going into it. Now, they might be able to exceed some lower expectations. That might be a role that they actually do better in than this one. But they're in a retooling situation. You just look at what the Big East is going to have coming back. Villanova won't be going anywhere. I would imagine that Creighton is still good enough to be competitive. We'll see what happens with Zagorowski here in his situation. But if he comes back, which I could see, they're still going to be a really, really good club. UConn's only going to get better. St. John's is going to only get better. I think St. John's is going to be really good next year. A chance to be a great team, next year. But you're going to have some programs take a step back. Marquette's in a state of unknown. Seton Hall probably is going to take a step back. Georgetown should be better, but they're still so young. Butler, young. Xavier, murky. So the league as a whole, like in the bottom area of it, is kind of in a tough spot. And you might have some coaching changes, and you might have some situations where we got programs totally retooling. So Providence might be able to benefit a little bit because they still have some players back. Maybe a transfer can pan out. And Ed is a quality coach. So we'll see if they're able to overcome that, and if they could. But I think they're probably in the 6, 7, 8 type of range in the Big East next year. You can't lose players as good as Duke and Watson and expect to be in the top 4 in your league. It's just not going to happen.
Now, if Duke were to come back, does that change things?
Oh, for sure. He's a great player. Yeah, he's a tremendous player. If David Duke comes back, Providence should be expected to be a top 5 team in the league, 4 or 5, because Duke's a great player. You can't be any worse in your supporting cast than they've been at times this year. And I actually think there's going to be a good amount of teams still trying to figure themselves out. I mean, I'm just going to name them to you. Teams that I still am not sure of heading into next year. DePaul, Marquette, Georgetown because they're so young, Butler. That's 4 right there. 11, 10, 9, 8. Right there then. So with David Duke on your team, you should be able to finish 5th.
Yeah. I think if I'm looking forward to next season, I think a realistic expectation would be similar to this year's Butler, maybe a step above, because I think Butler surprised a lot of people. Their freshmen are playing very well. So I think we can...
They don't even have 2 of them. They don't even have 2 of them.
Yeah.
Right.
Ubi Johnson and Jacoby Coles.
Yeah. I think if Watson, who is likely going to leave, and Duke leave, I think we'll be in the bottom half. I think we'll win some games we're not supposed to. We'll definitely lose the games we are supposed to. But a rebuilding year, it should be the expectation. With David Duke, I could also very well see a similar storyline to Alpha Diallo and Rodney Bullock, where he will leave and test the waters and possibly come back. The difference is David Duke is a different type of player than Alpha and Rodney, and he's more talented at this point in his career than those two were. So I think if he tests the water and hears good things, he's gone.
I will say one of the ideas we've kind of played around with if David Duke were to come back for next season is the Friars could kind of play their brand of small ball, copy a little bit of what Creighton's done, because Alan Breed has looked really good. Jared Bynum should only get better. You could play Jared Bynum at the 1, Alan Breed at the 2, David Duke at the 3, and AJ Reeves at the 4, especially those latter 2 as 3-point shooters, might open up something a little bit different from this offense that we haven't seen from Ed Cooley teams in the past.
Yeah, I've wanted to go the 3-guard lineup for a lot of the year just because, Cooley's been hammering home every post game that they're not stopping dribble penetration, they're not rebounding. So for me, to me, it was kind of like stop one or the other. When Bynum gets back, I was like, let's roll 3 guards up there at a time. And I thought when they had Nichols and Gant out there together in Horkler with one of those two, they were just too slow in the perimeter. So for me, like all year, I've wanted them to play three of those guys at the same time. Four might be a stretch just defensively and on the boards, but it'd be interesting. I think that's the one thing I worry about with Providence as far as like being able to make a really deep run in the tournament is just offensively. Like they really haven't been, since probably 2014, they really haven't been like I think 2014, a top 50, Ken Palm offense. And to me, it's a really tough way to string together wins come March if you really, you've got to be able to. You see some of these teams that in like the Big 12, they can just put up tons of points, and I feel like that's the one thing. It's tough. Like when Providence ran into like a Texas A&M or USC, it's tough to grind those teams into the ground when they're enormous, and that's the one thing I worry about a little bit with PC style is that they like to dirty the games up, but when you're just at like a complete physical mismatch, which most of the time PC is going to be, just with being realistic compared to these teams who can recruit in Texas or the South. It's just a different makeup of their roster. I feel like that's the one my concern I have for PC. So it's interesting you guys bring that up because I would like to see PC, and they tried a little bit last year to play a little bit faster, and then they kind of reverted back to the style Cool won with, and they turned it around. But that's my thing. I think for them to be like a Sweet 16 team eventually, I think they need to be a little bit better offensively and more kind of explosive offensively.
I could not agree more. I mean, I just think that that's such a good point. When you face the fellow power conference teams in those NCAA tournament games, you better be able to score the ball efficiently because those teams do it quite well. When you are physically overmatched like they were in the Texas A&M game, again, you better be able to have backcourt players who can score the ball. And if you're not able to do that efficiently and effectively over the course of a 40-minute game, you are going to lose. And if you're having a tougher day, you're probably going to lose by double digits. So that's the problem, is when it gets to this time of year and you've grinded, and now during a pandemic season, you might be exhausted. Do you have guys who can just get you buckets? And that's the thing with Providence is if you look at their KenPom, like Kevin said, they're at the top of this, the offense is actually a tick up from what it's been. But
doesn't feel that way.
Doesn't feel that way because you're giving up baskets as easily as you have. Everything just comes harder, isn't it? You watch a team come down the floor and score on Providence, and then I think as a Providence follower, you're like, all right, what are we going to do now? Like everything just comes everything comes harder.
Yeah, and it's in the past. I mean, you look at the last two super successful Friars teams last season. It's because you have Lawan Pipkins, who's a guard who can create his own shot and bail out the offense.
Too, a different.
Yeah,
he was a scoring point guard, but at least the kid was a point guard.
Yeah, and you go back to 2018 when the team made the Big East tournament run. That was the best ball that Kyron Cartwright played in his college career. That 3-game stretch, he turned it on. He hit every shot. He dunked on Xavier, and that's
second career dunk.
Yeah, and that's not something. I mean, I think that's one of the keys. The Friars would need David Duke to become that guy where he's really gonna be able to take over a game with his scoring, which he's done at points, but has not done consistently. And I mean, we've looked a lot at his shooting this season. His 2-point shooting percentage has been atrocious all season long because a combination of he can't get good looks and he doesn't always have his shot the way some of these other guys have their shot. But if you find it, that changes a lot.
Yeah, I think the biggest shock factor coming from a complete fan's perspective is the flip-flop between our defense and our offense, because normally we've been pretty sound on defense and our offense has struggled. To watch the flip this year has been very uncomfortable. It's like you're like, what's going on? And I think last season in the backcourt, when we would play with Lawan Pipkins and Malik White on at the same time, I think that was the best offense-defense split in the backcourt that we've seen in a while, because you could put Malik White on the likes of Gillespie or Zagorowski, and he would do a great job defending them while Pipkins was running the offense and creating shots for himself. I think that was a great combo. And like you said, Kevin, a few minutes ago about the 3-guard lineup, that worked for us very well in that 6-game stretch with Pipkins, Malik, and Duke all on the floor at the same time, with Diallo playing the 4 and Khalif logging a lot of minutes at the 5. And it was a great offense-defense split with Diallo and Khalif guarding their man in the paint, and then obviously Pipkins and Duke doing their thing and Malik guarding the backcourt. So I think going forward, because like we said, I think this season you're not expecting a drastic change in the next couple of weeks. I think if you can start to identify players that can fill those roles of defending the more dynamic guards in the league, those big guys that can, hold their own on the dribble drive, in the next couple of years will be pretty sound, but we got to start now. Like, you have to look forward now.
Yeah, I think you guys bring up a great point too. What's interesting is even though PC's offensive numbers are up a tick, they're not turning teams over anymore. And that was a lot of times when they look great, like that Marquette game, they were turning them over. And last year, it became like a dunk fest in that game. Like that's when they're getting stops and they're going. There was a game against when Xavier was top 5 a couple of years ago where they're out and running. And I think that's the thing we haven't seen that much. And I think that's our thing for Duke too. Like his 2-point numbers, I agree, aren't good at all. But he also gets nothing easy. Like there's not a ton in transition. He's getting so much attention. He's taking a lot of really difficult twos. And I thought early in the year he was hitting a lot of really tough shots. And I was like, wow, he's like, and his numbers on contested shots are really good. But you wonder what their offensive numbers would be if they were able to get even, a handful of fast break points off the turnovers more than they are getting now.
You watch St. John's at times this season, and they remind you of what the Ed Cooley Friars have been at points, just pressing teams, forcing those turnovers, and letting the defense kind of be the catalyst for the offense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but that hasn't happened this year. It just has not happened enough, anyways.
Yeah. And the offense has not been able to carry. Like I said, I think our expectation was the offense will be better, the defense will be worse, and that's happened. But the offense has not been good enough to outweigh the defensive shortcomings. And that's how you get to this point.
Yeah, and the defensive shortcomings. Again, like Kevin said, you're 4-8 in your last 12. Like, it might not just be shortcomings; it's just part of who they are, and that's why it's hard to see a turnaround taking place. That's why not only is it late, but like when we say how do they turn it around, sometimes the problem is the problem that it's part of like who you actually are. You always want to correct an issue, and you're going to try to coach it up, but if you're not going to, like at a certain point, it just is what it is. And that's the thing is Providence has more things that are kind of wrong with them this year than have been right. And I don't think it's any lack of trying to make an effort to get them better. It's just they haven't been able to do it.
At a certain point, you just don't have the players.
If they were to make a Big East tournament run, if they were to make a run, they would need A.J. Reeves to play the best basketball of his Providence career.
Yep.
That's the key.
I think Reeves, I think from what I've seen of Reeves, he has done some different things than we expected. I think rebounding, he's been a sneaky rebounder. He puts up, what was it? It was 7 one game, and I was like, okay, I didn't see that, but he put up 7 rebounds. Assists, I think he had 5 against Connecticut, or was that DePaul?
I think it was that game against UConn.
Yeah, he had 5 assists against Connecticut. I think he's increased his role in different aspects on the floor, but I think offensively, in terms of scoring the ball, we need him to step up. From the beginning of the season, we said it was going to be Duke, Reeves, Watson. Duke and Watson have delivered. Reeves has been streaky. He's got to step up. We know he's capable of it. We just need the consistency. He needs to be consistent for this team to make a run in the Big East tournament.
Yeah, go ahead.
This team, it's like my golf game. They can do everything, but you can never do it all at the same time.
Yeah, I think the one thing I was going to just add on AJ is, I think I wrote an article for Kevin McNamara before the season about AJ and kind of broke down all of his metrics and a lot of depth. And, I think early on, mentioned the first month or so of his career here, month and a half, he wasn't just hitting threes. Like he was scoring a lot inside the arc. He's getting a bunch of and ones. And my hope this year for him was that he was going to be able to be more of a versatile scorer. And I looked at the numbers last week, and his percentage of shots are up even more that are 3-point shots. And I feel like he's really been kind of relegated to almost like a spot-up shooter. And that's just different than the player that I thought, like Cooley talked about him being a really versatile scorer here. And I think he's got it in him. I just think they haven't been able to kind of find the right niche for him yet.
And if you look at that Georgetown game, too, I mean, they opened that game up. First play of the game was a play right to Reeves under the basket for an easy layup. And I don't know if they've done anything like that with him since. which kind of makes you question like what's either defenses are taking that away or they're not going to him in those spots.
I still cannot believe they lost that game.
Yeah, that was.
I mean,
it wasn't.
let's set any number aside. Like I'm just gonna tell. Like I watched that game, the entirety of the game. I was in disbelief when the game ended.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Weren't you guys?
Yeah.
How do you lose? I mean, how does that happen? But you know what it is? They stopped playing. They stopped.
Mhm.
They just kind of stopped. Their defense was terrible.
Yep. I think
that's Georgetown and Xavier games. If the Friars have those two games, which they should have had both, we're talking about them very differently right now.
Yeah, 13-9, still a chance.
Yeah. My biggest, I guess, disappointment of the Georgetown game, we were up 15, and like you said, John, it seems like defensively we just turned it off, and then the entire second half it turned into a slugfest, which it shouldn't have been. You had all the momentum, you had a huge lead, just keep on the gas, and we let off. And a lot of people were upset that David Duke missed the free throw. That wasn't the game. We shouldn't have been in a position where David Duke needs to hit a free throw to force overtime at Georgetown when you had a 15-point first half lead. The defense was just, that game, that ruined our Saturday, Matt. We were so upset.
Yeah.
And that was the game. See, I think AJ had 20 points in the first half, and he didn't get a shot until like 7 minutes into the second half. And, I understand there are X's and O's things that go into it, but you got to find a way, a guy who's that hot, to get him to look more like he canned a three. It was his first shot. He hit a three right away. And that was a disappointing thing for me, is like, this guy has it going. You got to find a way to get it to him even more. But yeah, it was just, that was a rough one. That was really rough.
Yeah. And Ed Cooley's been saying all season long the team was soft in that game, and I think that might be the epitome of it right there.
Yeah.
We've been going for a while now, so we'll wrap up. I'm gonna give each of you guys like a second here to get a last word, and the question's gonna be if you're the teacher grading the Friars at where they are right now for this season and the future, what grade are you giving them? Kevin, I'll let you start with this one.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, the only pass they get for me, like, I really don't think they had an off season. I really think PC got started later than everyone, and no one wants to hear it right now because everyone's kind of out for blood the last week or so, especially following the UConn loss. It's like people are grumpy as it is, even grumpy after a loss, and really, really grumpy after lose to UConn the way they did. So, to me, it's a C minus. It's just been to me, it's more to John's point. I think what's been disappointing is that I thought they'd find a way to get that kind of number. Like, there's so much made every PC game. There's almost at the talking points, like Providence needs the third scorer. But I think I look at it more along the lines to John's point, like that 4 to 8 is where they're shakier. Like, I don't. If you have more depth, you don't really need that third guy to be getting it every single game. That's the disappointing thing. Like, I thought, I watched Bryson a lot in high school, and I thought he was going to come in and be able to shoot a little bit and defend. And I think there's just been a lot of guys who just he's a good example of just being kind of out of sorts. And I look at Bryson, I look at Greg Gant, like those are guys who are really good prospects for a good reason. And I feel like, I don't know if it was a lost off season or what, but that's been kind of the killer thing is those guys not really developing this year. And that leads to huge question marks for going forward, because if those two guys who on paper, and it's not just a ranking, like both are really good AAU and high school players. Like Bryson Godin was the, NEPSAC AA player of the year. And that's the league that produced, James Boatnight that year, and David Duke's been there, and AJ Reeves and Cole Swider and all these great players. So like, if you can do it on that stage, like I watch those guys a lot. If you can perform on that stage, you can perform in the Big East. It just hasn't happened yet. So I guess that's what's hurt them this year, and also raises more questions for going forward, because you don't know, what Gant could potentially look like, or Bryson could look like. But it's hard for me to say, give him a grade, or really, I just think there's so many question marks going to next year and unknowns that you really. It's impossible to say. I'm concerned at this point, just because I feel like, the recruiting has dipped a little bit. It'll be interesting. I think the big thing for Providence is just to get more impactful transfers. I look at how, and John sees it firsthand, like a school like Creighton, or, I think Seton Hall's done a better job. They brought in some really good players. I think PC's brought in more kind of like role-playing transfers. And Pipkins was great last year, but Providence hasn't had those like high impact, like multi-year transfers that some other schools, the biggest, have had. And that's the one thing, I'm not going to talk grade, but the one thing I'm really most interested in and hopeful for is that Providence can go ahead and bring in someone that's going to be an impact transfer for 2 or 3 years, not necessarily a 1-year guy.
Yes. Because the 2 or 3 year transfer has a much better chance than the 1-year guy because they learn the system, they come into their own, and they could develop under that coach. You gotta get old and stay old. That's how it is. Did Kevin give a grade?
C minus.
C minus.
And you know what? I would match that grade. I hate to be anticlimactic, but I would be a C minus as well. I don't think they're at a D plus. No, I'm not going to sit here and say that. I think that they're a team that has been mediocre this year, has underperformed expectations. I don't think it's fair to say that this is a trend or that they're in a bad way or that the program's going to be heading down the, the S word. That's not how it is. It's fine. This has been a bad year. Programs can go through bad years and recover. Ed Cooley's still the coach of this team, and that matters. You have got to have the right leadership. Providence still has that. They still have the right people in the building. They still have adults in the building. They might have to recourse. They might have to go through, an off season of how do we get this right again? What do we need to do? And that's where finding the 2 or 3 year transfer could be big. You're going to have to go about things a little differently. But you know what? That's how life is. I think certain things haven't panned out. They thought that they would. They haven't. You turn the page after this year, and like we've been saying throughout this pod, can you put something together late in the season to show signs and give some of these younger guys some confidence that it can happen? I think Allen Bree could be a really talented guard as they continue to work on things with him. I think they can pick up another guard who could be a really good player. Losing Watson's going to hurt, but you got to be able to retool. Next year could be a hard year. Next year should be about competing, being a better team, like efficiency-wise and structurally, and then trying to build that into an NCAA tournament campaign the following year. That's how I would view the state of the program. I think you got to be realistic in your approach. This year, have they been a disappointment? Yes. Is the sky falling for the program? It is unfair to say that. It is unfair to say that. Just because you've had a bad year does not mean that the sky is falling for the program big picture. Again, Ed Cooley is still your head coach, and you still have some talent in place to be competitive. But we live in a world where if a team takes a loss, a bad day turns into, oh my God, this is awful for them. And it's like you have to take things day by day, especially in this sport. Providence has had a bad season. They've had several bad days that have been who they are. They haven't been able to finish games. But this time of year, we get into this 1-2 hour game turns into how a team is. Providence has become that team. I just think they're going to be okay, but I would give them a C minus, and I would match Kevin's grade. So our grading curve isn't dramatic at all.
And Joe, are you going to match the C minus as well?
I'll change it up. I'm going to go C. I was thinking the C range. I didn't know C plus, C minus. I'll go C. I think the play of Nate Watson and Duke lifts it up. But to quote Ed from the St. John's presser, we don't value individual achievement over a team loss. At the end of the day, Providence College lost the game. He said that after the St. John's loss at home. Someone commented on Nate, and that was Ed's response. I think that's indicative of the season. These guys can have big, stellar performances, Nate, Duke specifically. But at the end of the day, when you lose the game, individual achievement goes out the window because your team lost. It's a team sport. Looking forward, I think an impact transfer would be huge, and an impact transfer that's going to spend a couple of years in the program, like Kevin and John, you both said. LaJuan Pipkins turned out to be a great player, but we saw the learning curve that it took him to get there. He wasn't playing defense, and he was taking ill-advised shots, and he eventually got benched for Malik White and then had to earn his spot back. So I think you saw a very abbreviated timeline of his development there. I think if you can get an impact transfer that will, obviously he's not going to start off great, but can develop over the coming years, I think will be really good. And Allen Breed, I think next season is all about developing him into a top guard in the Big East. He's showing some great glimpses of it this year. I think my favorite Allen Breed play is the step back three on Marcus Zagorowski at Creighton. That was a dagger at the end of the game there. But he's gonna come on. I think Jared Bynum's gonna come on, and AJ Reeves he's gonna have to explode for his senior season. He's really gonna have to do something big.
Yeah. And we'll see what Jared Bynum develops into. Obviously, he's a young guy, and Ed Croswell, another younger guy, will be coming back. You can see what the Friars get out of him. So maybe these can be your impact transfers. You're just getting the impact probably a year later than you expected it. But I think that'll do it for us here. It's been great having you guys. We've talked through a lot of Providence basketball, and it's great to have your opinion. So thank you, Kevin. Thank you, John, for joining us.
Thank you, guys. This has been a pleasure. It's always fun to join the Flex.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you very much.
All right, it's our pleasure. You can find John basically on TV. If basketball is somewhere, he's probably either commentating it or tweeting about it. Kevin at friarbasketball.com. He's got all the write-ups and all the articles talking about the Friars. He and Craig Layton do a great job over there running that. As always, you can find us on Twitter at TheFlexHoops. Make sure you are subscribed to us wherever you are listening to this. And thank you for listening.
Go Friars.